to get to, right? I mean, he talked about the shooting at the Planned Parenthood over in Colorado. He talked a little bit about his broader strategy about battling ISIS and, of course, climate change. But clearly, national and international security, Martha, was the major headline in the conversation today by the president. He did have a bilateral, I should point out, earlier today with his Turkish counterpart, President Erdogan. They talked a lot about deconfliction in Syria. Of course, Russia is also over there. But I found it instructive that the president tried to hammer home this idea that global warming is a major element to what feeds and grows terrorism around the globe. He also talked about ISIS in particular and how the way that they can really get to them is by cutting off their resources to keep them from growing and spreading. Listen.
We've got to choke them off. We have to choke off how they make money. We got to choke off their ability to bring in new fighters because, you know, we've taken tens of thousands of their fighters off the battlefield, but if new ones are still coming in, then they continue to maintain a stranglehold.
That means freezing assets. That means getting to those oil fields. That means making sure that however they're generating revenue, whether it be from despots out in other countries or specifically direct lines of resources, you got to cut them off. You can't simply keep plucking them off the battlefield, Martha.
Yeah. With regard to Vladimir Putin, whom the president met with yesterday, the question was raised whether or not they can get Vladimir Putin on the same page or whether he will continue to back Assad in Syria. How's that going, reflected in what the president just said?
Well, pretty interesting. I thought he was actually, maybe for the first time I can remember in a long time, completely blunt and candid in the way he assessed what's going on with Vladimir Putin, which is to say, he said, listen, I'm not going to change the guy's mind. It's in his interest. In fact, it's been in Russia's interest for quite some time to back the Assad regime. There's an economic, there's a partnership there that spans decades between those two countries. But listen also to how the president framed the fact that he thinks eventually Putin will come around.
I don't think we should be any under illusions that somehow Russia starts hitting only ISIL targets. That's not happening now. It was never happening. It's not going to be happening in the next several weeks.
Not going to happen now, probably never going to happen. But the idea is if they can continue to apply pressure, they can bring Putin on board. Skepticism abounds, though, Martha.
Yeah, because they continue to go after the people that we're supporting there, and that's a huge divide in terms of the goals of both countries. Kevin, thank you very much.
So a bit of analysis right now. John Bolton, former U.S. ambassador to the UN, senior fellow American Enterprise Institute, Fox News contributor live in London now. And, sir, what did you hear from the president today after the 45-minute Q&A?
Well, I think on climate change, the points he keeps making are interesting and might have significance if the outcome of this conference was going to produce the kind of agreement that he kept referring to, but it won't. It will be a series of unilateral targets by individual countries, including countries like China and India, which do not commit to reduce carbon emissions, nor do many other developing countries until some distant point in the future. So even if you buy everything the president believes about man-made causes of global warming, the outcome of this Paris Agreement will be insignificant. What these people are doing is not an international negotiation. They're attending a church service about climate change, and he was just giving the last sermon. Now, on ISIS, at least from what we know publicly of the various bilateral discussions, and the president did hold many, I don't see any change in the circumstances. Just to pick up on Putin and Assad, President Obama for 4 years has been saying that Putin and the Russians would acknowledge that Assad has to go, and it was just a question of how to work it out. Today, he seemed finally to say he'd been wrong for the last 4 years and that he doesn't see when Putin's going to change. Well, no kidding. That's why we're in the circumstances we're in part, with a hopelessly contradictory policy.
But
so at least on
did say,
international issues, I didn't see anything new.
He did say eventually Putin will come around. That was the phrase he used. This comment will raise some
Good luck with that. Good luck with that.
This comment will raise some eyebrows, certainly, on what constitutes American leadership.
This is part of American leadership, by the way. And this is part of the debate that we have to have in the United States more frequently. For some reason, too often in Washington, American leadership is defined by whether or not we're sending troops somewhere.
What did you think of that?
He is flatly wrong. Number one, he should say who it is in Washington who says that American leadership is defined solely by whether we're sending troops somewhere. Who is the person, or who are the people who make that claim? In terms of the broader point that leadership at a conference like this one on climate change in Paris is something the United States should do, I agree the United States should take a leading role on key international questions. So if that's the case, the outcome here is going to be a failure of American leadership.
Many of these questions from reporters dealt directly with ISIS. I did not find that to be much of a surprise. Did you?
No, I think despite the president's rhetoric repeated at least 3 or 4 times in this press conference and over the past several weeks, that climate change is equal to or greater in importance than ISIS, his top foreign policy priority. I think the press understand that's just not a view shared by anybody outside of the Washington Beltway. So I think they are reflecting the concerns of the people they're writing for, that ISIS remains the priority. And given that despite the attack in Paris, on November the 13th, there's no change, no real change, no substantial change in what America's doing, that's a matter of great concern. You know, Britain's about to have a vote tomorrow on whether to begin bombing ISIS targets in Syria, and that's a real change for this country. But Obama's policy has not changed.
John Bolton, thank you for your time. Out of London, also talk about, sealing that border with Turkey. Easier said than done. That came up as well. There's much to cover on this, and we shall in the coming hours. Thank you, sir. John Bolton there in London with his analysis today. Martha?